2011 Jersey City, New Jersey, 07303 for more info. Right now, though, Zen and the Limits of Explanation here on WFMU.
The subject which has most interested me for many, many years is the simple question, who or what am I? What do we mean by the word I? And I find, as I investigate this question and talk with all kinds of people, that generally speaking, the word I refers to something that we sense or experience as a center of consciousness and decision living somewhere inside a bag of skin. Common speech reflects this in many ways. We say, face facts. We talk about being confronted with reality, and we talk about the difference between the knower and the known, the subjective and the objective, the internal thinker and feeler facing an external world. We say, I came into this world. I find there is therefore a general sense that I am something to which this external world is a stranger. That there is a feeling that there's deep hostility between the subject and the object. And this again reflects itself in our common language, where we talk about the conquest of nature, the conquest of space, and the conquest of great mountains like Everest. And all that this adds up to is that the human being experiences himself to be very lonely and feels that death is a terrifying threat, because he's been brought up in our kind of society and our kind of culture to experience himself as something isolated. Let's review this historically, because we shall see that in Western civilization we have been, in the past 2,000 years, under the influence of two great myths. When I use the word myth, I don't mean a kind of false story. The way I use the word myth is to signify an image, a great symbol. Men use symbols to make sense of the world. And we keep changing our symbols, and different cultures have different symbols. But a myth is an idea, or generally an image, which we use to explain the world and our own lives. So then, Western man has had two great images. The first image is that the world is the handiwork of a creator king, the Lord God. We are his creatures, and he has made us in rather the same way that a potter makes pots or a carpenter makes tables. In the book of Genesis, the creation of Adam is described in terms of ceramics. Because the Lord God fashions a figurine out of the dust of the earth, that is to say, out of clay, and then having made this little figure of a man, he breathes the breath of life into its nostrils, and the man becomes alive. And it's not insignificant in this line of tradition that Jesus is the son of a carpenter. Because the whole idea of the universe is that it's an artifact. It is something made. It could have been different from that. The universe could have been considered not as something made, like a table or a pot, but something grown, like a plant. And that children might say to their mothers, not, "Mommy, how was I made?" but, "Mommy, how was I grown?" But in our culture, it's natural for a child to ask the question, "How was I made?" Now then, this whole imagery of the human being as something made by a master craftsman became too much for the Western world. Because everybody constantly felt that they were under the surveillance of the Lord, being watched and being judged at every moment. I have a friend who is a very intelligent convert to Catholicism. And in her bathroom, she has one of those old-fashioned toilet operations where there's a tank near the ceiling and a chain which you pull, and then there's a pipe which goes down from the tank to the seat. And on this pipe there is a little plaque with a big eye on it, this kind of eye, and underneath in Gothic lettering it says, "Thou God seest me." So in the most private apartment of the house, where one closes the door and locks it, there is the all-seeing eye of the eternal judge of the universe. See, this was a very, very awkward idea. You know how you feel in school when you were a child and you were doing some work, you were writing, you may have been doing arithmetic or writing an essay, and if the teacher comes and looks over your shoulder while you're writing, you somehow feel blocked. You wish she would go away until you finished. So in the same way, Western man has tended to feel blocked by the all-seeing judge of the universe, and therefore invented another myth altogether. The universe considered as an unintelligent mechanism. What a relief. No God to judge me, no hell to go to, no conscience that I need follow except my own sense of taste. A world, however, that is perfectly stupid. A vast mechanical gadget in which I am trapped like a mouse in a cotton gin. And very many people, very many intelligent people in the Western world have, since the beginning of the 19th century, settled for this conception of the universe. That it is an unintelligent mechanism, a display of blind forces in which human intelligence has arrived by the merest chance of natural selection and evolution. So that we are confronted with a system of stupidity called life, in which we, as intelligent accidents, are trapped, and which therefore we have to subjugate to our wills by every conceivable technological device. And we know that in the end it will beat us. that each individual will die, and this kind of consciousness that we have that seems intelligent and that is capable of loving and being loved will simply become nothing. That in the end, life will be a brave gesture against futility. Now, I want you to understand that that idea, although it sounds very realistic and hard-boiled, is also a myth. And it has been for a long time among thinking people a plausible myth, after the myth of the Creator God had become implausible. See, the trouble is this. No kind of science ever proved that the Lord God on the throne of heaven doesn't exist. What happened was simply that we, through scientific investigation, we acquired a sense of the universe. A conception of time and of space, which made the old-fashioned idea of the Lord God simply implausible. The universe was something much grander, much more spectacular than could possibly have been worked out by an old gentleman with a white beard on a golden throne, surrounded with winged angels. That was all. Besides, he was a nosy Parker, and we didn't want him. But the new idea that man, that intelligence and consciousness and love and so on are flukes in an utterly irrational universe, or rather mechanical universe, is simply to be understood as a reaction against the first myth. Because, as a matter of fact, the idea that man is a fluke in a mechanical universe is palpably absurd. But it has an enormous influence on the way we think, and above all, on the way we feel. I said we say normally, I came into this world. Why don't we say much more correctly, I came out of it? Because, you see, a human being is a symptom of the universe in exactly the same way that an apple is a symptom of an apple tree. When an apple tree produces apples, we might say, this tree apples, using apples as a verb. And so in precisely the same way that an apple tree apples, we are living in a universe which peoples. We are symptoms of the kind of system in which we are living, and our appearance in the system tells us about the system. That is to say, just as in the words of Jesus, figs do not grow on thistles, nor grapes on thorns, so human beings do not grow on a tree which is merely mechanical, because human beings are not merely mechanical. What we have to realize is that a universe which peoples is an intelligent, thinking, organic, living system. And furthermore, we are not just separate little islands of life and consciousness existing in this world, but rather we should say that myself, my consciousness, is something that the whole universe is doing. You know, in ancient times, when people wanted to draw a map of the human soul, What they did draw was a picture of the universe as it was arranged at the moment when the individual was born. This was called his horoscope. The whole arrangement of the planets and the stars as they were then known, as they were at the moment of your birth. And this was supposed to be a picture of your character and of your destiny. Now, there was a lot of superstition in this, but one thoroughly valid idea, that the real you is not just something inside your skin. The real abiding you is all that there is. The works, as it is focused here and now, at a particular place and in a particular time, and we call this particular place and time my body, my organism. So your soul is not something inside your body. Your body is something inside your soul, because your soul is the total cosmos, all stars, all galaxies, the whole thing focused here and now at this moment. And just, I know you've had experience of this around here, that this may be an unfortunate illustration, but just as a tornado dips down out of the sky, here, then it withdraws, and then here, and then here. So in the same way, everything that there is dips down and becomes an individual, and then withdraws. That's what we call death. And it dips down again, and shall I say incarnates again, and it's doing it all over the place, as all us people, all us rabbits, dogs, cats, trees, mountains, stars, everything. But why don't we feel that way? Instead of having this feeling that I am a lonely little creature watching the world almost from outside and feeling that it's something with which I have to do battle. Well, the answer is we've been brought up the wrong way. We've been brought up to play the game of cops and robbers, good guys and bad guys. That is to say, the game of pretending that each one of us is separate. Each one of us behaves on his own. And this gets us into the most amazing messes. Think back to your own childhood. Think back to how you came to find out that you were you, and to have this sensation of being a separate and lonely individual. For example, we are told by our parents that there are certain things that we must do. You must go to sleep. You must love your parents. You must have a bowel movement every day after breakfast. Now, what is the meaning of this word must? Is it a commandment? Or is it simply stating a set of affairs, set of conditions? To be human, you must have a head. Did you ever see people going around trying to have heads? No. Well, so in exactly the same way, you remember very well that when you tried to go to sleep, you stayed wide awake. And supposing you try to love somebody. Look, supposing you as a husband or a wife say to your spouse, darling, do you really love me? What kind of answer do you want? Do you want your spouse to say, darling, I'm trying my best to do so? No. What you want is an answer to the question, do you really love me? You want the person to say, I can't help loving you. I love you so much I could eat you. But yet, we can say to our children such a remark as, darling, all good children love their mothers. And you ought to love your mother, not because I say so, but because you really want to. Do you see? This is a request which says, I command you to do something which will be acceptable to me only if you do it voluntarily. And that situation is called a double bind. And it goes on all the time. The most important double bind that we are put under in our upbringing is one which could be expressed as you must survive. We call it the instinct for survival. But actually, there is nothing of the kind. But you must survive is something really pushed into us. I remember talking some years ago to a woman who came to me and said, I'm scared out of my wits. I have high blood pressure and I'm afraid I'm going to die. And this terrifies me. So we had a long conversation. I wanted to try and find out what she was really afraid of in death. And we found out that it wasn't pain, it wasn't the idea of annihilation, of just endless not being. She said, do you know, what I'm really afraid of is what people are going to say. They're going to be at my funeral and they're going to say, poor old Gerda. She couldn't make it, could she? Because you see, there's something disgraceful about dying. Your will to live gave out. You didn't have the guts to go on. You succumbed. Oh, too bad. In other words, it's an injury to one's pride. Because you must go on living. Now this is the double bind again, because living is a spontaneous process. Just like sleeping, breathing, growing hair, shaping your bones, and so on. You don't have to think how this is done. It happens. It's marvelous. But it does. And to let it happen optimally, you mustn't get in the way of it. I mean, if you try to color your eyes blue, what a ridiculous thing if they're brown. So living, you see, is something that happens of itself. The Chinese term for nature, when translated into English, means that which is of itself so, which happens by itself automatically, though not in the sense of a machine. So if you tell the process of nature, the process of life, you must have it. It's exactly the same sort of thing as telling another person, you must love me. And if they try to obey that commandment, they put themselves into a state of contradiction. I am trying to love you means I don't love you. I am trying to go on living is also an approach to life which turns life into a drag. You know, there are a lot of people who would really like not to go on living and commit suicide. But they feel it's their duty to go on living because they have dependents. They also feel afraid to die because the social injunction, thou shalt live, is so powerful. See, suicide is a crime in many countries and states. You must do this. So you see, you go on living desperately. It's so desperate that if you have terminal cancer, The doctors have to keep you alive. They keep you on the end of tapes and tubes and wires, a ghastly, tortured organism that must go on living. Because the doctor is out of role when he is faced with an incurable disease. He doesn't know what to do with it without breaking his code of ethics. Now, when we are in the state of mind in which we must go on living, our children, who are the alibis for this, that is to say, we feel we must go on living because we are responsible for bringing up the succeeding generations. But all we do by this is that they catch the same attitude from us. And they are going to drag on for the sake of their children, who are going to learn to drag on for the sake of their children. Well, isn't that great? This is simply a system of hereditary stupidity. Because you see, children learn more from the adults' attitudes than they do from anything that adults say. We try to say the right things, but the way we actually live is what counts. So if we go on living under a sense of compulsion, must live, must get on, must earn that living, must make that grade, whatever it is, must look after the family, must be faithful to your wife, husband, or whatever. That's a mockery, and everybody knows it, but won't admit it. That, you see, that double bind, you must love me, is the trap in which we live and constitutes the main cause for our feeling isolated from the rest of the world. I do not live, I do not feel that I live as an expression of the whole cosmos, just as a leaf or an apple is an expression of a tree. But I am taught to feel that I live in spite of the cosmos, only to the degree that I struggle against it to wrest my life from the soil and the waters.
And we return in just one moment with part 2 of Zen and the Limits of Explanation. You're listening to WFMU. It's the Alan Watts Lecture Series. Stay tuned.
Breed a race of human beings, a culture which is, in technical psychological jargon, alienated, and which feels that it has a sacred duty to beat the physical world into submission. And the symbol today in Western culture, especially in the United States, of this state of mind is the bulldozer. I don't know how it is here in Michigan, but where I live in California, the bulldozer is ubiquitous. And this great, blunt, powerful, shoving thing it has on the front of it is knocking down hills, is putting flat track slots in the middle of mountains, and is the most aggressive, domineering symbol of man flattening the earth. I sometimes wonder whether that passage in Isaiah, every valley shall be exalted, and the hills laid low and the rough places plain, is that a prophecy of something nice or a forecast of doom? The flattened out earth. No mountains, no valleys. How boring can you get? And the funny thing is this, that when people want to live in the hills, they want to live in the hills because the hills are great. They like the hills. But if by going and living there they destroy them, is that sensible? What eventually happens, of course, to all these track lots in the hills is that the rains come and the houses fall down the slope because they've upset the natural balances of the area. They've torn up all the topsoil, scrubbed up all the brush and the vegetation, because that's tidy and neat, according to these people's notions. But all this sort of thing is a symbol of man at war with his environment, because he does not realize that his own physical existence includes the external world. Let me put it in another way. Your body is not just what is inside your skin. Your body includes what you call the external world. The skin doesn't divide you from nature, it joins you to it. Because the skin is simply a spongy, porous membrane through which you breathe and through which your nerve ends have contact with everything outside it. It's the bridge between you and the outside. And you on the inside and it on the outside always go together. You see, look, do you know the most fundamental, important thing in all metaphysics? You understand everything, in all mysteries of the universe. You just realize that every inside has an outside, and every outside has an inside. They just go together. As do, incidentally, black and white, light and darkness, and life and death. They go together in the same way as the crest and the trough of a wave. Did you ever see a wave with a crest and no trough? Or a trough and no crest? Never was there such a wave. Did you ever see an inside without an outside? Could you have light without the contrast of darkness, or vice versa? Of course not. This is the simplest thing that everybody should learn before they learn 1, 2, 3 or ABC. But it's always left out. And you see, when that's left out, and you don't understand that black and white are brothers, they're inseparable although different. See, they're explicitly different, but implicitly one. If you don't understand that, you get involved in a game called, black might win. In other words, it would be easier for there to be death than life. It's a little bit funny, isn't it, that anything exists at all that ever struck you? I mean, it would be so much easier for there not to have been anything, because being is a bit of an effort. I mean, it would be a much more rational universe if nothing had ever happened. But as a matter of fact, that's an impossible state of affairs. There can't be nothing. But something, existence, is not just being. It's an alternation of being and non-being. Do you understand that? Listen to a sound. Noise. Noise is something you hear. But noise isn't just sound. It is an alternation of sound and silence. It's a vibration. So now you see it, now you don't. And everything is that way. Supposing I'm sitting next to a pretty girl in the movies, and I put my hand on her knee and leave it there. In a short time she will cease to notice it, because it's pure being. But if I pat her on the knee, then she notices, she knows I'm still there, because I put my hand on and take it off, and on and off, and on and off, and on and off, and that's what creates existence. So in the same way, all our sensations are sensations of vibration, of now you see it, now you don't. And these two together constitute being, life and death, black and white, solid and space, something and nothing. But we play the game, you see, that nothing might win. Now when you see you've forgotten the connection between these two things, which is the secret, that Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle. When you've forgotten that connection, and you're afraid that the black side may win, that everything may be lost, that all existence may plunge into the abyss of endless night, then you play the contrary game, but white must win. And that's where you get into trouble. You must love. You must live. And that's the biggest hoax ever invented. So, we go around doing battle against our own nature. Now, can we get out of this trap? Or are we hopelessly hypnotized? Is there anything, supposing you realize this is true, can you change your state of consciousness so that you don't any longer have to feel that you are an isolated island of sensitivity locked up in a bag of skin? Could you come to feel that you are really, deep down, simply a particular expression of everything that there is? To put it more strongly, could you realize, as clearly as when you put your hands on something hard and you know it's there, could you realize that clearly, that your real self is the works, is the whole cosmos? How would you go about that? A lot of people do know this. In the East, they call them Buddhas. And they know this in a very natural way. But in order to approach that kind of knowledge, really the main problem about it is to get rid of our chronic objections to it. For example, this is not something you know in quite the same sort of way that you know a thing you can look at from the outside, like looking at your own hand. See, the funny thing about consciousness is this: it's like the headlights of a car. The headlights of a car shine down the road, but they don't shine on the wires immediately behind the bulb that connects it to the battery. They don't even shine on the battery. Consciousness does not illumine its own origin. You are conscious, you are aware, but you don't know how. That's because consciousness looks out instead of in. But in just the same way that underlying your consciousness is the whole complexity of your nervous system, which is very much you, but you don't know it. So in just that sort of way, your essential self looks out rather than in. You don't feel it, just as you don't see your own brain. But there it is. And when you die, you go back. As it were, you are withdrawn into yourself. The place, the center from which you came out when you were born. And what happens once can happen again. Ever think it was funny to be born? Think about it. What will it be like to go to sleep and never wake up? Think about that. Imagine it. To die. And that's that. Now, don't imagine yourself lying around forever in a dark room, buried alive, as Edgar Allan Poe. No experience of darkness, no experience of anything, neither darkness nor light. I can give you an immediate illustration of that by asking you, what color is your head? From the point of view of your looking around without having a mirror near you. What color is your head? I can't see it. But do you experience darkness there? No. It's not dark. I don't have a black thing behind my eyes. I don't have a white thing. I can't get at it at all. It just has no color. You see? But it's a very lively thing, isn't it? You can't have any conception of it. But on this thing which you can't get a color on this depends all the colors you can see. So in the same way, when you're dead, you go back into this thing, which can't be seen and which can't be thought about. Because you see, the moment you think about what will it be like to go to sleep and never wake up, becomes the corollary. What is it like to wake up without ever having gone to sleep in the first place? In other words, that's birth. Now you were born. You have no memory of having existed before. And what happened once can happen again. Doesn't matter how long the interval between is, because that won't bother you. If everybody on this planet is suddenly annihilated in a huge atomic explosion. Well, maybe in several billion years, the human experiment will happen again in some other galaxy, and it'll feel just like we feel now. That's the way it works. Just as in a seasonal way, the apples come on the trees. But what we need for our health at this time is human beings who have the sense of belonging, who have the sense that they really do come out of this world. Because people who have that sense are, in a way, better fitted to live in the world than those who don't have it. They're better fitted to live because they respect their environment. They respect the earth as they respect their own skins. And you aren't fit to interfere with the outside world, and you must interfere with the outside world. There's no way of getting around that. But you aren't fit to interfere with it unless you reverence it. Unless when you build a town, you do it with love. Now, the striking thing about our countryside, Americans are materialists. Everybody says that. They're not. They hate material. Look at any American city, almost any American city. Does it look as if it was made by people who loved material? No. It's a junk heap. It's a set of fronts down Main Street, and behind there are wrecked automobiles and shacks and junk of every conceivable description. The most fantastic example of this is Los Angeles. You can drive from central Los Angeles way out to Claremont, 40 miles to the east, and go continuously through pasteboard and junk. This is not a materialist culture. It is devoted rather to the abolition of material in all its aspects, to the abolition of time and space. Not to the civilization of the universe, but to the Los Angelization of the universe. But don't think that because I put this thing off to a few thousand miles to the west that it isn't here too. A race of people, you see, who is not at home, doesn't love the environment, and is blind. You can go to the mountains of the west, the most gorgeous valleys, and see cities put up by people who obviously don't know where they are. Huge billboards, weird and grotesque structures that absolutely are out of any kind of harmony with the environment. Expensive ugliness. And so, by this means, this is merely a symptom of the fact that we are destroying our planet. And we are destroying it because we don't realize and have no awareness of the fact that this planet is ourselves. The earth is not merely our mother. It's the close to our heart. And closer still is the solar system in which the earth moves. Closer still to our heart is the galaxy in which the solar system moves. And the very heart of hearts is the whole system of universes and galaxies in which we exist. That is the middle of you, not something far off and remote.
That was the late Alan.
And conclusion of tonight's Alan Watts lecture, Zen and the Limits of Explanation, from the late Alan Watts, whose lectures we bring you every Thursday between 6 and 7 here on WFMU.
Now, this morning I was giving you a talk on the fundamental basic attitudes expressed in Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. And the title of the book, Tao Te Ching, introduces now the second word in the title. I've been dwelling this morning on the first word, which is Tao, and so comes up this second word, De. And this word, again, is
faces us with some serious problems of translation. Ordinarily translated virtue. But virtue, as we understand it today, isn't at all appropriate. The nearest kind of, when we speak of the healing virtues of a plant, that's nearer to the meaning of this word, death. The Japanese pronounce it tofu, the Cantonese duck, and the northern Mandarin approximately dirt. And in the section of the Lao Tzu where this is really introduced, the text says something like this: superior virtue, not virtue, thus it has virtue. Inferior virtue can't let go of virtue, thus not virtue. And we more or less paraphrase that by translating: superior virtue is not conscious of itself as virtue, and therefore it is virtue. But inferior virtue is so hooked up with being virtuous, or hooked on being virtuous, that it's not virtue. Now then, therefore, this word is a connection of virtue and magic. It means the excellence of things, in the sense that a tree excels at being a tree, and nobody really knows how it does it. There is no way of imitating a tree, except the only thing is to be one. And so in the same way, when a human being shows extraordinary skill, it seems that it comes natural to him. It seems that he doesn't achieve it by any kind of artificiality. If there is some discipline in it, it's concealed. So, excelling in something naturally, and yet it's something that is so difficult to understand that it seems that it has been done by magic, is the meaning of this word. So what is the state of affairs, a way of talking about particularly a human being who has learned to live in harmony with the Tao. Now, of course, everything is fundamentally in harmony with the Tao. In the book called the Zhongyong, or the Unwobbling Pivot, it is said, the Tao is that from which nothing can depart. That from which things can depart is not the Tao. Fundamentally, you see, you can't get away from it. It's like a situation in which we are all floating in a tremendous river. And the river carries you along, anyhow. Now, some of the people in the river are swimming against it, but they're still being carried along. Others have learned that the art of the thing is to swim with it. And they're carried along too. But they know it, you see. They know they're carried along, whereas the people who are swimming against it think they're going in the opposite direction. But they're not really. So that was a sort of discussion we were having this morning, when I find invariably, whenever I talk about these things, Americans raise moral issues because we are a people incredibly bamboozled by preachers. And so this always comes up. Bamboozled. Preachers. Yes. And have chronic guilty consciences. And so those questions are always raised. But this, you see, explains part of this situation, that you have to flow with the river. There is no other way. But that you can swim against it and pretend not to be flowing with it, but you still are. So, but a person who is not making that pretense anymore, who knows that you have to go with the river and swim with it, suddenly he acquires behind everything that he does the power of the river. The person swimming against the river, you see, does not by his action express the force of the river. The person swimming with it, he goes along and he has that whole river behind him, but he's subtly directing it, because you can change direction in the course of the river. You can go to the left or to the right, as a ship can use a rudder and still go along with the current, or more skillful still, as a sailboat can tack. Because when a sailboat tacks and goes in a direction contrary to the wind, it still is using the wind to blow it along. Now that is the most highly skillful art of all. That is Taoism in perfection, the art of sailing. Very intelligent. I remember once I was looking in the open air, and one of those glorious little thistledown things came, and I picked it up like that and brought it down, and it looked as if it was struggling to get away, just as if you caught an insect by one leg, like a daddy long leg or something like that. It seemed to be struggling to get away, and at first I thought, well, it's not doing that, that's just the wind blowing. Then I thought again, really? Only the wind blowing? Surely it is the structure of this thing which, in cooperation with the existence of wind, enables it to move like an animal, but using the wind's effort, not its own. It is more intelligent being than an insect, in a way, because an insect uses effort, like a person who rows a boat uses effort. But the man who puts up a sail is using magic. He lets nature do it for him with the intelligence to use a sail. See? So in just this way, the meaning of this is that kind of intelligence which, without your using very much effort, gets everything to cooperate with you. You, for example, never force other people to agree with you, but you give them the notion that the idea you wanted them to have was their own. This is a feminine preemption. A woman who really wants a lover does not pursue him, because then most men feel that she's aggressive, and if she's aggressive, she obviously is a woman who has had difficulty in finding love. Therefore, there must be some undesirably secret thing about her. But if she, as it were, makes a void, then, and is slightly difficult to get, then people get excited. They know she's a highly prized object, and so they pursue. Same way, when you want to teach a baby to swim, the thing you can do is to put the baby in the water and then move backwards in the water and create a vacuum, and this pulls the baby along. It helps it to learn the feel of the water and how to swim. It's the same principle. So, also, clever, difficult to getness is one of the very best means of acquiring immense publicity. Take the case of T.E. Lawrence, who published The 7 Pillars of Wisdom in a limited edition. And this became an extraordinarily celebrated book. It cost hundreds of dollars a copy to find one on the market. They waited and waited and built this up, and finally it was published as general edition. And it was a knockout, because the first one had been sort of secret and difficult to find. If you have patience, you see, you can always do this. So the whole art of the ruler, see, the Tao Te Ching is a book written for several purposes. You may take it as a guide to mystical understanding of the universe. You may take it as a dissertation on the principles of nature, almost a naturalistic, a handbook of natural law, we would say. Or you may also take it as a political book, a book of wisdom for governors. And the principle which it advocates, basically, is the virtue of governing by not ruling. Look at it in this way. Supposing the President of the United States were as unknown to you by name as the local sanitary inspector, man who looks after the drains and the sewage disposal and all that kind of thing. This is not a glamorous figure, you see. But for that very reason, he probably does his job more efficiently than the President. Because the President wastes an enormous amount of time in interviewing various groups from the Elks and the Girl Scouts and conferring honors and all this kind of thing. The poor man's life must be an utter torment because he's so well known and therefore has absolutely no time to give to the government of the country. I mean, think of his mail. And all the people who have to be employed sifting that out and assessing it. So that if he were someone quite anonymous and that we didn't have to think about, he would be a very, very good ruler. In just the same way, for example, you don't have to attend, unless you're sick, to the government of your own body. It happens automatically. This is this expression, ziran, of itself, and it goes on day after day after day, and the better it is, the less you have to think about it. When you see well, you do not see your eyes. If there is something wrong with your eyes, you start seeing spots, and those spots are spots in your eyes. When you hear well, you never hear your ears. But when they start singing, you know, then you're starting to hear your ears, and your ears are getting in the way of their own hearing. So, on the deepest level, a person as a whole can get in the way of his own existence by becoming too aware of himself. And then he lacks this quality, dearth. Now, the Taoists then proposed that there be something to help people get back to Tao and to be able to be in a state of dearth, so that they wouldn't get in their own way. And this is connected with the idea of being empty. Emptiness, being somehow vacant, was the secret of the thing. The highest kind of knowledge is not know-how, but know-how, N-O-H-O-W. To be able to do it know-how, without any method. To achieve this, something is practiced which is called fasting the heart. The heart, in Chinese, is a word which doesn't mean heart in the physiological sense. You see, it's part of the De character. Shin. It's usually located about here. And it means heart-mind. It's equivalently translated as mind. And in all the Zen texts where the word mind is used, no mind, mushin, it is this character. the psychic center. Now, the best kind of heart is absence of heart. In English, the word heartless has a very bad connotation, as does the word mindless. A heartless person is an inconsiderate, unfeeling person. A mindless person is an idiot. But a person who has mushin, or no mind, or no heart in Chinese, is a very high order of person. It means that his psychic center doesn't get in its own way. It operates as if it wasn't there. Zhuangzi says that the highest form of man uses his shin like a mirror. It grasps nothing. It refuses nothing. It receives but does not keep. And the poem says, when the geese fly over the water, and they are reflected in the water, that the geese do not intend to cast their reflection, and the water has no mind to retain their image. So, the whole thing is, you see, to operate in the world as if you were absent. Now, this is built into us physiologically, fundamentally. Let me ask you simply, what is the color of your head from the standpoint of your eyes? Your eyes don't see your head, do they? You look all around, and you see everything else, but your head you don't see. Do you feel that your head is black? No. Hasn't any color at all. Outside you see your field of vision is an oval, two eyes, and this creates sort of two centers of an ellipse. So there's this whole field of vision. Now experiment. What is beyond the field of vision? What color is it where you can't see? It isn't black. This is an important point. It's no color at all beyond there. And in this way you can get an idea of what is meant by that character that I discussed this morning, Xuan, which although it formally has the meaning of darkness, this one, although it formally has the meaning of darkness and the deep and the obscure, it actually refers to this kind of no color, which is the color of your head, so far as your eyes are concerned. Now, so in this sense, the invisibility of one's head, almost the not having of any head at all, is the secret of being alive. To be headless, you might say, to have no head, in just the sense I'm talking about, is our way of talking about the Chinese expression mushin, no mind. Now, as a matter of fact, if you want to see the inside of your head, all you have to do is keep your eyes open. Because everything that you are experiencing in the external visual field is a state of your brain. All these colors and shapes are the way in which the brain nerves translate the electrical impulses in the external world, in the world outside the envelope of skin. So they translate all what is going on outside into impulses which are to us shape and color. But shape and color are states of the nerves, so what you see when your eyes are open is how it feels inside your head. You think your head is a blank, but actually it's being a blank. You don't see your brain as an external undulating corrugated structure. You see your brain as everything outside. So in this way, the emptiness of one's head is the condition of seeing. The transparency of the eye lens is the condition of seeing color. It has no color itself. Eckhart said this, because my eye has no color, it is able to discern color. This is in Germany in the 13th century. This is fundamental Taoist idea of being absent as the condition of being present. Being not there. So, Zhuangzi says, when your belt is comfortable, you don't feel it. When your shoes are comfortable, it is as if you weren't wearing any. Likewise, your clothes. See? The more you are aware of these things, the less properly they are made, or the less properly they fit. But we raise an objection to this, a very simple objection. If I don't know I'm there, I seem to be missing everything. We want to know that we know. If we're happy and we don't know we're happy, we might just as well not be happy. To be happy and to know that you're happy is really the overflowing of the cup of life. Of course, the penalty for that is to be miserable and to know that you're miserable. Some people are miserable without knowing it. But, you know my limerick, there was a young man who said, though it seems that I know, what I would like to see is the eye that knows me when I know that I know that I know. Now this is the great human predicament. The development of self-consciousness, the development of the possibility of reflecting upon one's own knowledge. And this is simultaneously a blessing and a curse. And Taoism does not escape this problem. I mean, it doesn't avoid this problem, it deals with it. But it doesn't deal with it obviously. So we get back to this fundamental verse about the nature of De. What is highly virtuous is a virtue that is not conscious of itself as virtue. The moment it's conscious of itself as such, you see, it fails. So in this way, we love to see a child dancing all by itself, lost in the dance, and not performing for an audience. And we say, oh, if only I could dance like that. If only I could become like a child again, innocent. But then soon we know when parents notice how beautifully a child dances, and they all approve of it and say to this child, dance for us, the child begins to lose this power. And it puts on airs, it knows it's noticed. And we don't like that. We say, that's affectation, that's showing off, that's phony. What we want you to do is to dance as if you had no audience, not even yourself. Which of course puts the child in a double bind, because it says to the child, we require you to do something that will be acceptable only if you do it as if it wasn't required. We do that all the time to our children and to each other. You must love me. After all, you promised to do so when we got married, didn't you? And so on. So, this is the difficulty. But somehow, a very great artist, in the maturity of his life, somehow is able, at least to give the impression that he does what he does without playing to the gallery, without self-consciousness. It seems perfectly natural. So how does he get there? There was a Taoist sage, later than Lao Tzu. His name was Liezi. We romanize that as L-I-E-H. And he had a reputation for being able to ride on the wind. So light. Zhuangzi says in one place, it's easy enough to stand still. The difficulty is to walk without touching the ground. because in the state of being in accord with the Tao, there is a certain feeling of weightlessness, parallel to the weightlessness that people feel when they get into outer space or when they go deep into the ocean. So this is, of course, connected with the sensation that you're not carrying your body around. I described this morning the sensation that an expert driver has when he really is with it in a car, that the hill lifts him up and drops him down the other side, that he and the road are all one process. And that's equivalent to the sense of weightlessness. And so this is connected to, this is the inner meaning of Lietze riding on the wind. When Suzuki was asked, what is it like to have Satori, he said, it's just like ordinary everyday experience, except about 2 inches off the ground. And so we say in our own songs, walking on air, never a care, something is making me sing, tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la, like a little bird in spring. What is this then, weightlessness? It means, of course, partly that you're not moving around in constant opposition to yourself. Most people move in constant opposition to themselves because they are afraid that if they don't oppose themselves all the time, something awful will happen. It's so easy to bend your arm. No problem at all. But supposing you make a fight about it, and you take these antagonistic muscles, as they're called, and fight them against each other, so that you have to bend your arm like that. See? How ridiculous. But if you somehow felt that in bending your arm you might make a mistake, you know, instead of bending it you might hit yourself, then these two muscles get nervous, and they fight each other to be sure that everything happens all right. That's anxiety, you see? So, when the human being developed the power to be aware of himself, to know that he knows, in other words, when the cortex was formed over the original brain, he fell from grace. That was the fall of man. Because when he felt, he had the sensation of being in charge, of being in control of himself, and you can only have that sensation when you are aware of what you're doing, he got anxious. Am I aware enough of myself? Have I taken enough factors into consideration? Have I done all that should be done? And then he started trembling. This was the fall of man, of course. This is what is meant. The Lao Tzu says, when the great Tao lost, there came duty to man and right conduct. In other words, nobody talks about how you ought to behave unless things have gone radically wrong. There wouldn't be any conception of faithful ministers of the state unless there were a lot of lousy politicians around. No one would talk about filial piety unless there were wayward sons and daughters. So there is constantly in the tradition of Taoism the idea that all moral preaching is confusion. There's a marvelous case of this in the Zhuangzi book, where there's an alleged conversation between Confucius and Lao Tzu, in which Lao Tzu asked Confucius to explain to him what is charity and duty to one's neighbor. And Confucius gives him a little stuff. No, being giving up one's self-interest and working for others. Lao-Tzu says what stuff? Sir, regard the universe. He says, the stars come out invariably every night. The sun rises and sets. The birds flock and migrate without exception. All flowers and trees grow upwards without exception. You, by your talk of charity and duty to one's neighbor, you're just introducing confusion into the empire. Your attempt to eliminate self is a positive manifestation of selfishness. You are like a person beating a drum in search of a fugitive. The modern equivalent of that would be the police car about to raid a bad nightclub and coming with its siren full on. See? And everybody in the club gets out. So, all talk about selfishness, all talk about success in becoming virtuous, or enlightened, or integrated, or non-neurotic, or self-actualized. Let's use all the terms that are being used. All this talk attests to the fact that it hasn't happened, and will in fact get in the way of its happening. Well, to go back to Lietze, who succeeded in riding the wind, what happened? Lietze found a very great master and went to study with him. And the master lived in a small hut. And Lietze sat outside the hut. And the master paid absolutely no attention to him. This is sort of the way with Taoist masters. Because why would they want students? They have nothing to teach. So after a year sitting outside, Lietze went away. And he just fed up with waiting so long. Then he sort of got regretful about this, thought he really should make a try. So he went back to the master, who said, why this ceaseless coming and going? So he sat there and tried to control his mind in such a way that he would not think of the differences between gain and loss. In other words, try to live in such a way that nothing is either an advantage or a disadvantage. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away. And all the neighbors came around to commiserate that evening. So sorry to hear your horse has run away. That's too bad. And he said, maybe. The next day, the horse came back, bringing 7 wild horses with it. And everybody came around in the evening and said, oh, isn't that lucky? What a great turn of events. You've now got 8 horses. And he said, maybe. The next day, his son tried to break one of these horses and ride it, and was thrown and broke his leg. And they all said, oh dear, that's too bad. And he said, maybe. The following day, the conscription officers came around to recruit force people into the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the people came around and said, isn't that great? And he said, maybe. You see, that is the attitude of not thinking of things in terms of gain or loss, advantage or disadvantage, because you don't really know. The fact that you might get a letter from a solicitor, from a law office tomorrow, saying that some distant relative of yours has left you $1 million, it might be something you would feel very, very happy about. But the disasters that it could lead to are unbelievable. Internal revenue, to mention only one possibility. You never really know whether something is fortune or misfortune. But we only know the momentary changes, and as it alters our sense of hope about things. The Taoist is wise enough, eventually, you see, to understand that there isn't any fixed good or bad. And so his point of view is what is called non-choosing. Well, anyway, Lietze attempted to keep his mind in a state of non-choosing. And this was a very difficult thing to do, to overcome one's habits of feeling and thinking in this respect. And after he had practiced this for a year, the master looked at him. You know, sort of recognized he was there. After another year's practice, he invited him to come and sit inside his hut. And then, however, something changed. And Lietze didn't try anymore to control his mind. What he did was, he put it in this way. I let my ears hear whatever they wanted to hear. I let my eyes see whatever they wanted to see. I let my feet move wherever they wanted to go. And I let my mind think of whatever it wanted to think. And then he said it was a very strange sensation because all my bodily existence seemed to melt and become transparent and to have no weight. And I didn't know whether I was walking on the wind or the wind was walking on me. Now that's the fasting of the heart. In the ordinary way, you see, you say, well, that made quite an impression on me, as if you were a slate or a blackboard upon which life makes an impression, as the chalk does on the slate or the blackboard. So we say, well, here are these events, and I'm the observer of all these events, and I remember them, and they make an impression on me. But in the psychology of Taoism, there is no difference between you as observer and whatever it is that you observe. The only thing that is you is the observation of life from a certain point of view. I said a little while ago, you think your heads are empty and blank, but the actual inside of your head is self in terms of everything you see on the outside. We make an opposition, you see, between the thinker and the thought, the experiencer and the experience, the knower and the known. Because we think about knowledge in terms of certain metaphors. The metaphor of the stylus on the writing sheet, the reflection on the mirror, all those sort of images come into our idea of knowledge. But in the Taoist theory of knowledge, it's quite different. There isn't a knower facing the known. It would be more like saying that if there is any knower at all, it contains the known. Your mind, if you have one, is not in your head. Your head is in your mind. Because your mind, understood from the standpoint of vision, is space. The Chinese use this word, hu. Which means sky, space, and sometimes emptiness. And there is a saying that form, or, shape and color, there's one word in Chinese that means really both shape and color. And this are said to be identical. Space or emptiness is precisely shape-color, and shape-color is precisely emptiness. This is actually a Buddhist saying from the Tridaya Sutra. So that all that we call space contains the myriads of shapes and colors and bodies and weights and so on. It doesn't reflect them as a mirror, but it is the absence which guarantees their presence. And it's their presence which guarantees its absence. So there's this mutual relationship, again, the mutual arising expression, between voidness and form, between existence and non-existence, being and non-being. These are never felt as alternatives or things that are in some kind of contest. So then, when it is said that there is not any thinker behind thoughts, not any experiencer who has experiences, this is a way of saying that experiencing, knowing, is not an encounter between strangers. Western thought concentrates very much on knowledge as an encounter. And it is thus that we talk about facing facts, facing reality, as if somehow or other the knower and the known came from two completely different worlds and met each other like that. Whereas actually the phenomenon of knowledge is almost the precise opposite of that. Instead of being a collision between the two wandering bodies in space, knowledge is much more like the expansion of a flower from the stem and the bud, where the opposite points of the flower are the knower and the known. They are the terms of something which, as it were, lies between them. Let me repeat, we tend in all our metaphors and common speech to think of life as an encounter between the knowing human being, the knowing mind, and the world. They think of it not as an encounter, but as an expression, not an impression, an expression of a process that has polarized itself, coming out from a center and expressed itself in terms of opposites. Well, of course, this is the basis of the whole Yang-Yin principle of, you know, this jolly old thing. And where you've got two interlocked, what are they, fishes? Commas? It's a fascinating emblem. You call it a monad, yes, but there it is. This is a helix, essentially, this grip. And this is the formation of spiral nebulae. And it's the position of sexual intercourse. I here, this is my eye, and you here with your eye. I'm trying to get to the middle of you, you're trying to get to the middle of me. And neither one of us exists without the other. This is yang, the white, and yin, the dark. Yang, the word yang originally means, or is associated with, the south side of a mountain, which is sunny. Yin, the north side, which is dark. Yang is the north bank of a river, which gets the sun. Yin is the south bank of a river, which is in the shade. Now, you see, you don't get a mountain with only one side. The mountain, if it's a mountain at all, goes up and down. It's like the wave You don't get a wave which has a crest with no trough, or a trough with no crest. You can't have half a wave. So, yang and yin are quite different from each other, but just because they are different, they're identical. This is the important idea of the identical difference. The saying goes in both Taoism and Buddhism, difference is identity, identity is difference. The Chinese word for is not quite the same as our word. This word, which is usually used, has rather the meaning of that. So they would say, difference, that identity, identity, that difference. And so this doesn't mean quite is exactly the same as. It means rather is in relation to, or goes with, necessarily involves. Difference necessarily involves identity. Identity necessarily involves difference. So yang and yin. There is no yang without yin, no yin without yang. When I was first studying these things, I was terribly bothered by how on earth I was going to see this multiple, differentiated world as a unity. What was going to happen? What would it be like to see that all things are one? The sages keep saying all things are one. And they all look to me so different. Because here was all this chit-chit going on around one, and it was doing it in different ways, and all these people came on in different ways, and they had all their houses, and all their cars, and all their this and that. And the whole world looked full of the most bony, prickly differences. And I thought, well, what's supposed to happen? Is there supposed to be a kind of, as if your eyesight got blurred, and all these things suddenly went blah and flow together? What is this experience of nirvana, of liberation, etc., supposed to be? Because so many of these, especially Hindu sages, write about it as if it was just this kind of dissolution of everything, so that it all become like slug with a salt on it. Well, it took me a long time. And suddenly one day I realized that the difference that I saw between things was the same thing as their unity. Because differences, borders, lines, surfaces, boundaries, don't really divide things from each other at all. They join them together. Because all boundaries are held in common. It's like, let's think of a territory which has all been divided up into property. There's your property, my property, etc., etc. There are the fences. But we hold if I live next to you, your fence is my fence. We hold the boundary in common. We may make up silly arrangements as to who is responsible for the maintenance of this fence. But nevertheless, we hold our boundaries in common. And we wouldn't know what my plot of land was, or where it was, unless we knew the definition of your plot of land and your plot of land that is adjoining. So boundaries are held in common. And I could see then that my sense of being me was exactly the same thing as my sensation of being one with the whole cosmos. I didn't need to get some other weird, sort of different, odd kind of experience to feel in total connection with everything. Once you get the clue, you see that the sense of unity is inseparable from the sense of difference. You wouldn't know yourself, or what you meant by self, unless at the same time you had the feeling of something other. Now, the secret is that other eventually turns out to be you. I mean, that's the element of surprise in life. When suddenly you find the thing most alien, we say, now what is most alien to us? Go out at night and look at the stars and realize that they are millions and millions and billions of miles away. Vast conflagrations out in space. And you can lie back and look at that, say, well, surely I hardly matter. I'm just a tiny, tiny little peekaboo on this weird spot of dust called Earth, and all that going on out there. Billions of years before I was born, billions of years after I will die. Nothing seems stranger to you than that, more different from you. But there comes a point, if you watch long enough, when you'll say, why, that's me. It's the other. That is the condition of your being yourself, as the back is the condition of being the front. And when you know that, you know you never die. So let's have an intermission.